Hello, my name is Glòria from Synapse, and I would like to kindly introduce you to the development process of the roadmap data cube. Here. So basically, after a few roadmap consortium meetings and discussions with the work packages within the consortium, there was an agreement on the need for a tool that would allow the visualization of the Alzheimer's data in the data sources that were existing in Europe. And also the relation or relevance within each of the stages of the disease. To this purpose, the heat map was conceived as and the data cube was conceived as a heat map with each of these features, the outcomes, the data sources, and the disease stage as one of the axes of the cube. So outcomes, data sources, and disease stage. Basically, this would create a heat map where, for example, the outcomes, the areas with darker colors will represent the outcomes that were better represented in each data source, or the outcomes that were more relevant for each stage of the disease. In order to develop the first axis, Work Package 2 went through a series of literature review and the consultation with groups and shared the survey within the stakeholders as mentioned yesterday. And basically they come with a huge list of outcomes that was refined with the help of the data sources integrated within the consortium in order to improve the comprehensiveness behind some of these concepts because it was kind of difficult. And then we end up with a list of 148 outcomes that were relevant for the disease. Moving on, subsequently, Work Package 3, which was composed by the data sources of the consortium, which were from several countries within Europe, helped to contact 77 data sources, and including EHRs and clinical trials and cohorts, and collected with the help of a questionnaire the availability of the data within each of the data sources. And it produced a table similar to this one, where the darker colors were the outcomes better represented in each of the databases. This effort generated the first facet of the cube. So this is the facet that represents the Alzheimer's disease outcomes towards the data sources. Basically, here in the horizontal axis, we have the data sources clustered by clinical trials, EHR, and cohorts. And here in the vertical axis, we have the Alzheimer's disease outcomes categorized. Each of these small line or spot is one outcome and their availability within the data source. Darker colors mean data better available or more available, and lighter colors mean gaps or data difficult to achieve that will need some movement there to be able to reach the information. We also applied, with the feedback from Work Package 2, we applied some filters where we were able to highlight the relevance of each of the outcomes for the people with dementia, for the carers, and the health professionals. So here you can see the outcomes of more important or priority outcomes for the carers, people with dementia, and health professionals. Again, Work Package 2 went with impressive work with relating the outcomes and compiling the relevance with each of the stakeholders towards each stage of the disease. Basically, they were able to categorize each of the outcomes and the relevance towards mild cognitive impairment, mild dementia, and moderate to severe dementia. This is the second phase of the data cube. This is the Alzheimer's disease outcomes versus the stages. Horizontal axis will be the stages, MCI, mild dementia, and moderate to severe dementia. and the vertical axis will be the outcomes categories. Darker areas means outcomes that are more relevant for each stage of the disease, basically. And finally, we were able to merge both efforts from work package 2 and the relevance categorization of the outcomes within the stages, and work package 3 availability of those outcomes within the data sources. And we merged in a representative facet of the cube, where we can find in the vertical axis data sources and the horizontal axis the stages of the disease. Basically, here we can see in darker colors the data sources that have more representative data for each of the stages of the disease, which is MCI, mild dementia, and moderate to severe dementia. And this is the partners of these are the partners of the project and the collaborators, Dementia, DP UK, and EMIF. And if you allow me, I would like to show you the cube live. So. We're starting with it. So basically, this is the cube. This is the home. Here we can see each of the facets of the cube. Here we have a guidance figure. So this facet will be the outcomes versus the data sources. This facet will be the outcomes versus the stages, and this one, the data sources against the stages. We can apply the filters that we spoke related to people with dementia and carers and health professionals, and there will be highlighted the outcomes with more relevance for each stakeholder. If we zoom in, here we have the image I already showed you, where you can see the data sources clustered and the categories of the outcomes. And then we can zoom in again and have a proper detail on the information that was provided. Basically, you can hover over the names of the data sources here, and you will have the proper name and the country where they are from, and who are the governors or the custodians of that database. In purple, we have clinical trials. In pink, we have EHRs. And in yellow, we have the cohorts. And this one over here is CDG, which is another positive result from Roadmap, which is a linkage between an EHR from here, from Catalonia, CDApp, and a cohort from here also, Redigi. So it's an enriched database. So here you have the data sources, and here you have the outcomes. And basically, you can hover any of these cells that will represent with darker colors the most available outcomes, and you can have extra information that was provided by the data source on that outcome. Here you have the legend for guidance, and here you have a navigator panel. So you can move to the areas that you see like with clearer colors, because there seems more information is missing regarding those outcomes within those data sources. If we go back, we can then move forward to the Alzheimer's disease stage versus the outcomes. And as explained, we can see darker areas with more relevant outcomes for that particular stage of the disease. And we can also move in and see with more quality the difference. And finally, we can see the representation of the relevance of each data source within the stages of the disease. We can also click here and we have the list of data sources and the different stages. Darker colors as well, but more relevant outcomes. Representation of the database. And that's it. Any questions, something you would like to see? Thank you for your attention.
Hi, Serge Janssen. I have well, it looks really interesting, but could you explain a bit more when you say the darker colors are linked to more relevant data? What does that mean? Is that quantitative, qualitative? How do I need to look at it? What does relevant mean?
So it depends on the facet, actually. In this one it's easier to explain. For instance, here, since we have the outcomes versus the data sources, and we can just click in and you will have legend for guidance here. So basically, darker colors means that this outcome is very well represented in the data source. It's directly represented, and as you move to the lighter colors, it's the degree of the availability of that outcome within this data source. Basically, you can access to it indirectly, or you can access to it partially because you don't have the overall outcome, or you need to access, or you don't have the data per se, but you can access to it via, I don't know, linkage with other data sources, or you don't have it at all. White gaps means that the data source wasn't sure what to answer, so we need to further discussion to be able to answer that. This is for this facet, and then this facet, for example, is the representation of the exercise of work package 2. So basically, it's the outcomes against the stages. So it means that they went through all the stakeholders with the surveys and the systematic literature review and so on, and they decided on, or each stakeholder was able to give their criteria on the relevance of each outcome for each stage of the disease. So the scale is similar, but it actually means different things depending on the facet of the cube.
Can we access that? Because I think
that was my question. Yeah, I've got this.
Yeah.
What it means, because I still don't completely get it.
Yeah, I know that maybe in one session it's kind of difficult, but the idea is to go public in a future with it. We are still working on it, but we will see.
So you're going to go open source then? When do you think? When do you think that would happen? How long?
So the project is actually finishing today.
Oh.
So today is the
okay,
last
so
day
I'll
of
have
the
that
project.
tomorrow then.
So we're in project mode still.
Go.
But the idea is that this is essentially finished, to be honest, and it's going to be a living entity anyway.
Yes.
Because we will be expanding the number of data
Surely.
sources and maybe other refinements. So the idea is to go public as soon as possible, say a couple of weeks to 1 month max. But we need the agreement of the data sources because, as you can see, this gives an impression of the data source, what they have available, what they don't have available, that kind of stuff. Yeah. So we need the agreement of each and every of the 77 data sources to display that information publicly. Once we get that, then the cube will be publicly available. Yeah.
I can do this without the So Carlos, following up on what you just said, just that I understand it more. So it gives you an overview of the landscape, what's there.
Exactly.
Can you link through to the data, or it's just it tells you the data source owner is X, and if you want access, you contact Y?
Exactly, the second.
Okay.
The second. That doesn't, mean that we cannot in the future perhaps, go a little bit further and provide some form of direct contact with the data source or some form of deeper metadata, if you like.
I was thinking about an ENIF type of approach where you...
Yeah. So this is essentially about landscaping, as you say. Yeah. Sorry to come. I think you're feeling to speak, actually.
Thank you for your presentation. You really have to have bionic eyes to see what's on the screen. What kind of outcomes you collect? I can imagine some.
Yeah. Well, actually, maybe Work Package 2 can answer that.
And in relation to that question about the outcomes, there is some where it looks like there is no data for those outcomes. So are you making recommendations to future research that they should be collecting data around these outcomes?
I think that's the idea. Maybe Catherine wants to talk about it, but
Right.
probably the perspective of the project is moving towards that.
We can't see it.
I know, but you can see it on the. Maybe.
Can you read it or?
Yeah. I think it would be useful if you go through the list for the
I mean, it's a completely comprehensive list. There's, as you can see, there are hundreds of outcomes there. It covers everything: cognitive ability, sort of practical issues, activities of daily life, personal, sort of autonomy. It really encompassed absolutely everything. Behavior, everything that was important to the stakeholders that we contacted. So that was people with dementia, their carers, healthcare professionals, and a range of other professionals. So it's a really comprehensive list.
But also quality of life.
Quality of life. Yes, everything. Yeah, everything.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't frame anything. The evidence came from the people who. Well, literally, we conducted evidence and elicited the views of people and asked for their opinions about what was important to them. We didn't frame anything.
Yeah. So if you want, I can read for you the categories. So we have clinical diagnosis, disease severity and progression, cognitive abilities like memory, language, and visual spatial ability, functional ability and independence, behavioral and neuropsychiatric symptoms, medical investigations, and assessment of the health care by professional, and use of healthcare and social services, therapeutic treatments, significant disease-related events as hospitalization, institutionalization, safety, and patient quality of life, caregiver quality of life, and family, and mortality and comorbidity. So these are the bigger clusters, and then we have a series of outcomes within each of them.
So just in terms of what it means in terms of the gaps, and obviously this is a comprehensive list of outcomes, and one of the exercises that was done with the outcomes work package was to prioritize those for the different groups. So what we would ultimately like to do is have a core data set that we would recommend collected across different data sources. So we can understand what our priority outcomes are and where the gaps are, so we can target those. So you're right, that is the next step.